Hello, everyone. Welcome again to our daily Bible study. We are taking a look at Job chapter 40 today. Really interesting chapter. I'd have to say that Job 40 and 41 are probably my favorite chapters in the Bible when I was a little kid. Probably for shallow reasons, but nonetheless. And you'll see why, and hopefully you already can maybe guess if you read these chapters already. So if you'd like our free PDF, you can download it at our website at tobelikechrist.com. Our first section is our short outline of the book of Job and how we've broken the book down. We're in the third section now, which is chapters 38 through 41, where God is responding to Job. He's speaking to Job out of this whirlwind and responding to the debate that Job has been having with his friends for 30-some chapters before this. And that pretty much clarifies our characters, which are going to be Job, who is being spoken to, and God, who is doing the speaking. Let's break the text of the chapter down now so we can get a grasp of what's being said. We've got 24 verses. I've got it broken down into 3 sections. The first one is verses 1 through 5. Job chooses to stay silent. God, once you remember, he's been challenging Job with all of these questions that he can't answer because Job had demanded answers from God. He wanted answers from God, insisted that God would meet him and give him answers. And so God comes down and he says, well, how about this, Job? How about you give me some answers, and then we'll figure out if you really are in a position to question me or not. And so God has been asking these questions in the previous chapters, and Job is quickly learning his lesson. God says, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. So give me some answers, Job. I haven't heard anything. So he now gives Job the opportunity to speak. And though God was really only about halfway through his questioning at this point, Job had already learned his lesson and he had decided to keep quiet. He wasn't going to say anything. He said, quote, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth, in verse 4. Job and his friends, you remember, they had kind of taken turns going back and forth, speaking and responding during their debate. But when the Lord challenged him and then gives him an opportunity to speak here, Job wisely forfeits his opportunity to make the rebuttal, and he just lets God continue, which I think that's a smart move. Section number 2 now is verses 6 through 14. God challenges Job with more questions. God told Job to, quote, dress for action and ready himself for more questioning. He asked, quote, will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be right? It seems Job may have fallen into the trap of thinking so much of his own righteousness that due to his lack of answers about his circumstances and his frustration, that he was actually prepared to malign God's character before his own. And not that this is, I think, a marker of Job's overall character, but this is a result of the frustration that he's in because of his circumstances. His tough situation, his suffering, his sadness, his grief has pushed him to this point. And God is gently, or maybe not so gently, correcting him and bringing his thoughts back in line with the way that they really should be. God now poses more questions to Job, similar to those in chapter 39. Did Job have the strong arm or the power of the Lord? Did his voice crack like thunder like God's did? Was Job adorned with majesty and dignity, the majesty and dignity that belonged to God? Could Job share that? Obviously, no. Could Job abase, bring down, humble every proud and wicked person on the earth if he chose to do it? Did he have that kind of power? If he did have that kind of power, then maybe he was in a position to contend with the Lord. But of course, we know that he didn't even possess 1% of the power necessary to do that. Okay, so that's section number 2. I do apologize if you can hear the construction noise outside. They're still tearing up the road, but that is not going to stop us from talking about Behemoth in section number 3, verses 15 through 24, a very interesting section. So in this section, God describes one of his most marvelous creations, one of the most marvelous animals. And this animal is described as, quote, the first of the works of God, and it's called Behemoth. This was a formidable and untamable creature, although it was a herbivore. It ate plants, not meat. So Job didn't have to be worried about eating it, or rather being eaten by it, but it was a marker of God's power and his creative force. God said that Behemoth's strength was in his loins and in his stomach muscles. His limbs were like iron bars and his tail like a stiff cedar tree. Behemoth could stand in the middle of a rushing river and not be threatened. And so the question again is, God brings this up, Job, do you have the power to tame the behemoth, to put a ring in its nose like a bull and lead it around and make it do your bidding? And of course, the answer is no. So that brings us to the end of chapter 40. And for our application, or more of like a comprehension question today, I want to ask, what was the behemoth? This has been a topic of some debate, and especially the Leviathan, which is going to be introduced in chapter 41. And the Leviathan does appear a couple times in the Bible, that name at least. So what was Behemoth? What kind of animal is this? What animal that we know of fits all these characteristics? If you read commentators on this subject, many of them suggest the Behemoth is an elephant or a hippopotamus. I think a hippopotamus is the most popular opinion. It's not just commentators that hold this, but if you look this up on Google or something like that, I think the most popular answers that you're going to get from non-Christian websites are that, Behemoth is just describing a hippopotamus. Now, there is one quite notable problem with the view that this is a hippopotamus. Did you see it? Can you see it in the text? The behemoth is described as having a tail that can be stiffened like a cedar tree. Have you ever seen the tail on a hippopotamus or on an elephant? Both of them, although mighty creatures in their own right, and hippos are actually very dangerous, their tails are not impressive. It's probably the least impressive part of their whole body. And the cedar tree is like one of the most mighty trees on earth. And so it seems like it would be really strange for somebody to compare the tail of a hippo to the mighty cedar. Now, one of the reasons that you hear some older commentators say that this is probably a hippo, and why you see this on a lot of secular sites, two reasons. For the older commentators, a lot of them wrote before the fossil record had really come into any kind of maturity. The idea of ancient animals and these animals that have been long extinct, that was kind of not even in their mind. That science hadn't been developed. At least, I mean, we're talking like commentators who wrote a couple hundred years ago, but I still reference a lot of their work. And then you also have like the secular writers who obviously believe in the secular naturalistic timeline of the world, where human beings and these ancient creatures are separated by millions and millions of years. So they say, well, we got to come up with some animal that's contemporary with modern man, because these ancient creatures didn't live during the times when humans were around, when, they lived and died long before humans were evolved. That is what they would say. Well, if you can't tell by now, I don't exactly hold to that position, and my timeline is more of a literal biblical timeline, younger Earth timeline, than what many of these secular people would propose. And I think it's very possible that some of these ancient animals that we have now discovered in the fossil record could be behemoth, that they're far better candidates in the fossil record for a behemoth-like creature rather than anything that we see on the Earth today. So I would say probably not a hippo. I think sauropods, a class of what we call dinosaurs, is a much better candidate for behemoth than the little stumpy-tailed creature that is the hippopotamus. Now, I know that makes me, it puts me in the quackery camp of rejecting all good modern scientific discoveries. I guess I'm in the quackery camp. I do believe in a younger Earth, a more literal view of the Earth's history. And I would encourage you to go take a look at some of the archaeological discoveries that suggest ancient men actually knew about the dinosaurs, and in some cases drew pictures about the dinosaurs, even though they were supposedly millions and millions of years apart. But that will be for our apologetic series, which I hope to do one day on this channel, but that'll be after our 5-minute studies. So for now, I will have to leave you with my opinion. You can reject it or accept it or question it, that behemoth is actually something far more ancient than anything that we've ever laid our eyes on, at least in living flesh. Thanks for studying with me today, and Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow to talk about Leviathan, which maybe we'll have some similar discussions.